Aloha. My name is Sang Hyuk Lee, Senior Fellow at the Swiss Center and Professor of Economics at the University of Hawaii and Manu. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Phanwin Yokying, Fellow at the Swiss Center and the presenter of today's EWC Insights seminar series. She's a development economist with specialization in time use data and gender analysis. Dr. Yokying's recent publication include child labor in Thailand and land ownership and women's empowerment in agriculture in Ghana. Currently, she is studying the impact of migration on well-being of farmers in rural Nepal and rural Cambodia. Dr. Yokying has worked as a consultant for International Food Policy Research Institute. She has also worked for the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and has also collaborated with Thailand's National Statistical Office. She received her PhD in economics from American University. Today, Dr. Yokying will talk about the effect of migration on time use of other family members in Nepal. Our audiences can write questions using the Q&A function on the bottom of the Zoom. Phanwin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sang-Hyuk, for the introduction and for moderating today's session. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to present my work on Nepal via the EWC Insights this afternoon. So let me share my screen. I hope everyone can see this. If there's a problem, let me know. Okay, so as a roadmap for my presentation, my presentation will start by describing the economy as well as the migration situation in the context of Nepal. Then I will move on to discussing the research objectives as well as the conceptual framework underpinning the research question. Then I will move on to discussing the data as well as the time use data and the econometrics model used to address the research questions. And lastly, I will describe the descriptive as well as econometrics results and conclude with relevant policy implications. Okay, let's begin by taking a look at Nepal's GDP composition by key sectors. And these key sectors are agriculture, industry, and services. So let's first focus on the blue line at the top, which captures the services sector. As you can see, there's an upward trend in its share of GDP over time. And in 2020, just above 50% of Nepal's GDP came from the services sector, making it the largest sector in the Nepalese economy. Moving down to the red line at the bottom, which captures the industry sector. In the same year, about 13% of its GDP came from the industry sector. And as for the agricultural sector, it has been declining over time, its share of GDP from about 35% in 2001 to 23% in 2020. So what this graph is telling us is that even though Nepal it was one of the poorest country and the slowest economic growing countries in Asia, the country has been doing fairly well in terms of diversifying its sources of income and reducing its reliance on agricultural production and shifting its production from agriculture to other key sectors, especially to services. But despite the country's effort in diversifying its economy, agriculture still plays an important role in its economy. As you can see by the blue line here, which now captures the agricultural sector, in 2019, the agricultural sector employs almost two-thirds of the total employed workforce in 2019, compared to about 21% for the service sector and 15% for the industry sector. And so this graph is indicative that Nepal is very much an agricultural-based economy where farming, especially subsistence farming, remains an important source of livelihoods for the majority of the households, especially those in the rural areas. Okay, so, and because of the changing priorities in economic development, out-migration has been a global phenomenon, and Nepal is no exception to this trend. As you can see by the declining slope here, the share of individuals living in rural areas has been declining over time, from 86% in 2001 to roughly 79% in 2020. And this is largely due to out-migration of individuals, especially farmers, from rural areas to elsewhere. They are moving away from agriculture. And so the question becomes, why are people moving away from agriculture? Why do they migrate? And this graph here is a relationship graph that I created. It shows different key factors affecting out-migration from rural areas to elsewhere. I know it's a little bit messy, but I hope when I go through this, it will clear things up. So we have three, so this diagram has three sections: the green part, the blue part, and the orange part. The green and the blue part are what we call the push factors. Push factors are the factors that push people out of their home communities. And the pull factors are the factors that attract people to the area of destination. And so the orange part, it captures the pull factor, and whatever that is above that, there are the push factors. So let's focus first on the green part, which captures the agricultural related factors. One of the major driving force that pushed people away from agriculture is the falling productivity in the agricultural sector. In fact, Nepal's crop productivity is one of the lowest, is the lowest among South Asian countries. And this is due to several interrelated factors, including poor access to markets, extension services, limited access to irrigation system, modern technology, and other essential inputs. And also, high population density is another contributing factor, because high population density leads to increased competition and demand for the already limited amount of land in Nepal. So this causes land fragmentation, and land fragmentation in turn depresses land as well as agricultural productivity. Also, geographical factors, geographical constraints is another important determinant of agricultural performance. Villages located in steep mountainous terrain, as well as remote villages, they're vulnerable to landslides as well as to erosion, which can adversely affect crop productivity, access to market, access to transportation, and irrigation system. So all of those factors combined, they hinder agricultural performance of many farming households in Nepal. And another interrelated factor in the agricultural sector is the inconsistent streams of income. Farming alone is an insufficient source of income for a lot of rural households, because farmers, they face various economic, environmental, and institutional shocks such as drought and flood. And so because of that, it enhances their income volatility, which in turn increases their vulnerability to poverty. So that is pretty much the key factors driving people away from the agriculture into other sectors. So let's move on to the blue part of the diagram here. Another major factor, another characteristics of the Nepal's economy is high unemployment as well as underemployment. So let's focus first on the unemployment part. Nepal's population has been growing at a fairly rapid rate, making it a pretty young country with about 64% of its population under the age of 30. And because of that, and because of the modest economic growth, Nepal has been growing at an average rate of about 4%. It's fairly low compared to other South Asian economies. And with increasing population growth, the economy is not expanding fast enough to accommodate the increasing labor supply, especially among youth, causing a fairly high unemployment rate among youth. And unemployment rate among youth, those people aged between 15 to 29% is as high as 19%. And because of this, Nepal is actually a prime example of a phenomenon called jobless growth. Jobless growth is characterized by high unemployment rate. Even though the economy is growing, there's still high unemployment rate. And so that the lack of job opportunities in the country really, or in that particular areas, in rural areas, really push people away elsewhere to seek for employment. Another issue is underemployment. The majority of jobs in Nepal, they're concentrated in the informal segment of the economy, where productivity and wage are pretty low, very low actually. And while the working conditions are poor. And so because of that, the majority of people working in the informal sector, they're underemployed. They're the so-called working poor. And so those combined really drive people away from rural areas of Nepal. But moving on to the pull factors, robust economic growth and development in other areas, such as in the Kathmandu Valley or in India, it generates better and more job opportunities that comes with higher wages. So those characteristics attract people to migrate to India, to Kathmandu Valley, and to the Gulf countries in order to obtain better employment and uplift their living standards. And so because of those push and pull factors, farmers are diversifying their sources of livelihoods, and labor migration become an alternative supplementary livelihood strategy. And so this diagram really shows that out-migration is not the social or economic strength of the country. It actually is an indicator of deeper development issues in the context of Nepal. Okay, so as you can see by this picture, out-migration is very much a male-dominated phenomenon. The majority of the migrants are males, and the share of female migrants is fairly low. Very low. During the past decade is slightly above 5%. And the majority of the migrants there are in their working age. And people engaging in internal migration, they tend to migrate from the hills and the mountains area to the Terai or the Kathmandu Valley, because those areas are where development and job opportunities are concentrated. A lot of people migrate, they tend to migrate from province 1 and province 2 to province 3, because province 1 and province 2 are the most underdeveloped provinces in the country, and province 3, which is where Kathmandu is more developed. And for international migration, individuals engaging in international migration, their major destination countries are India, Malaysia, and the Gulf countries, including Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. They have a lot of demand. They are the major migrant receiving countries for Nepal. And focusing more on international migration, since that is it's a dominant form of migration in the context of Nepal. This graph shows labor permits issued by the Department of Foreign Employment to Nepali workers, to those who wanting to work abroad. If they go to India, they don't need any labor permits because India and Nepal, they have a friendship treaty. They can just walk across the border with no labor permits. So what you can see on this graph is that the number of labor permits issued to Nepalese migrants have been increasing over time up until 2014, 2015, when it started to drop. And this drop is due to the decline in the demand of workers from the Gulf countries. And this reduction in the labor demand is due to the sharp drop in oil price that started in 2014. So the revenue of the oil-rich country declined significantly. But despite the decline in number of labor permits issued, as you can see by the upward blue line here, the remittance inflow has been increasing steadily over time. And in fact, Nepal is one of the biggest beneficiaries of funds sent by migrants abroad. And in 2020, personal remittances make up about 24% of Nepal's GDP. That's very large. In fact, and if you can see from this graph here, this particular percentage share is significantly higher than other major migrant sending countries in the region, including India, China, Philippines, and Vietnam. And so what this graph is telling us is that remittances is one of the major sources of income for Nepal. It's one of the major driver of economic and social development in Nepal, and it's actually one of the primary engine for poverty reduction. Speaking of poverty reduction, what's interesting about this Nepalese economy is that other developing countries, they tend to have rapid growth and modest poverty reduction. But in the case of Nepal, they have modest growth, but rapid poverty reduction. Poverty has gone down significantly for Nepal, very rapidly. Okay, so moving on to the research objectives. One of the, so with the increasing trend of remittances and migration over time before the COVID pandemic, the migration literature, they often focus on either on the migrant themselves, as well as their contribution to the economy of their home communities, or they focus on the condition of the areas of destination. But the well-being aspect of the left behind individuals has not received sufficient amount of attention. And in fact, I think people who are left behind in rural areas, they're invisible. And I think their roles and responsibilities, as well as their well-being, especially the non-income dimension of their well-being, and the interconnectedness with this common practice of migration is not well understood. So this paper that I'm presenting today is going to enhance the visibility of the left behind individuals and their experiences and well-being, especially the non-income dimension. So we do that by examining the impact of migration on time allocation in work activities of left behind family members. And we focus on all age cohorts. So we have 3 subsamples: children, working age individuals, and the elderly individuals who are 60 and above. And the activities we focus on includes agricultural activity, non-agricultural activities, domestic and care work, and water and firewood collection. So 4 main types of activities in total. And so, and I think this paper is important because out migration, I think it's important to see whether out migration have implications on the division of labor, as well as the reallocation of household responsibilities within the household, especially among children and elderly individuals. So now you might be wondering, how can migration affect work time? So theoretically, migration can influence time allocation via three main mechanisms. So the first mechanism is through changes in reservation wage. The second is through changes in household credit constraint. And lastly is through changes in household labor supply. So let's focus first on the reservation wage. And reservation wage here is defined as the lowest wage in which a person is willing to accept a job. So migration in the context of the developing countries, it can help to increase economic as well as social status of the migrant sending households, partly because they are now receiving the non-labor income or remittances. I guess you could call that currency of care as well. So with that, the reservation wage of the left behind individual increases. So an increase in reservation wage have two different impacts on the work time of left behind individuals. An increase in reservation wage could create a disincentive for people to work, because now their reservation wage increases, they can spend more time on leisure activities and less time on working. So their work time in agricultural activities, non-agricultural activities, for example, could decrease. Or an increase in reservation wage could cause people to work more. And so if, let's say, because your wage increases, you can spend less time on leisure and more time on working. So your work time could increase. So that's the one route of how migration can theoretically affect work time. Another channel is through changes in credit constraint. So migration through remittances, it can reduce household credit constraint and increase household credit availability. So now they have an additional income coming in terms of currency of care. So they could use it to, for example, invest in agriculture to boost their productivity and reduce operational costs in the long run. So with this investments in agriculture, people left behind could actually spend more time in agriculture. Or alternatively, they could use this additional income and increase in household credit availability to invest in non-farm micro enterprises. So this could increase the amount of time that they spend on non-agricultural related business. Or they could use this additional income to purchase, in the context of developing country, to purchase labor-saving appliances for their households, or gain access to electricity, or to gain access to pipe water, for example. So this could reduce the amount of time that they spend on collecting firewood, on domestic and care work, so on and so forth. So this is the second route of how it can affect the work time. And lastly, the third route is through changes in labor supply. So when there is a out migration of a family member, household size in the migrant sending household automatically decrease. So which implies that household labor force is dropped due to the withdrawal of family members due to migration. So because of the drop in household labor supply, the left behind members may have to shoulder more work responsibilities and burden. And because of that, their work time could increase. And in this study, we assume that because of migration, household labor supply decreases, shifting the workload and the responsibilities to females, especially to working age individuals and to children, in order to compensate for the withdrawal of a household family member. So that is basically the conceptual framework underpinning this research question. So now let's take a look at the data. The data that we're using in this paper comes from the 2008 Labor Force Survey. It was administered by the Central Bureau of Statistics of Nepal, and it contains a very rich and comprehensive information on socioeconomic, demographic, household characteristics of individuals who remain in home communities. So for example, it contains data on age, gender, educational attainment, household composition, labor, non-labor income, as well as employment characteristics. And most importantly, it contains hours of work per week among the left behind individuals. We're not using time use survey for this because Nepal doesn't have its time use survey data. So we're using data from the labor force survey. So in the labor force survey, they ask questions to their respondents. How many hours per week do you spend on cooking, cleaning, water collection, firewood, fetching firewood, agricultural activities and non-agricultural activities? So they do incorporate a wide range of paid and unpaid work activities. Not as comprehensive as the time use survey, but it's comprehensive enough for us to see how their time use pattern changes in various activities, both paid and unpaid. So in our analysis, we restrict our focus to households in the rural areas. So we have just a little bit over 40,000 individuals from 7,900 households. Okay, so this is the equation one here is the model, is the main equation I am using to answer the research question. And don't worry if you don't have background on econometrics, because I will explain this in such a way that you will understand the main equation that I'm using to address the question. Okay, let me define all these items in the equation. So the I here, the small i's that you see, it captures each individual in the data set. So the I, it goes from 1 to 40,000 something, because it captures the data for each individual. And the K, it goes from 1 to 4 because it captures each activity. We have 4 activities in total. So agricultural activity, non-agricultural, domestic, and care work is 1 activity. And then fetching water and firewood collection is another activity. Okay, so this time star that you see here, it captures hours per week, individual I spent on each activity K. And this is pretty much a vector, and think of a vector as your shopping basket because it contains a lot of a lot of items in it. So this is a vector capturing time use for the left behind individual. Alpha 0 is just an intercept. We don't need to worry about that. Alpha 1 is an important actor for us because it's the actor that is an estimated coefficient that would tell us how migration affects work time. So MIK, it captures migration. So to be more specific, it captures the number of migrants in each household. So if household A has no migrants, M is 0. And if household B has 2 migrants, M is equal to 2. So alpha 1 here, when we run this model, it would tell us how the impact of migration on time allocation, on the outcome. So now you might be wondering what is the X and the E doing in this equation? Because the M and the time star should adequately allow us to answer the research question. So to answer that question, let me remove migration from the discussion here for a moment, and let's just focus on our time allocation in our daily lives. So in our daily lives, we have 24 hours in a day to do whatever we want. Time is finite. Only 24 hours, that's all we get. And so the way in which each individual allocate our time, it really depends on a host of characteristics, a bunch of characteristics. So it could depend on the number of kids you have in your household. For example, if you have kids in your household, you could spend more time on cooking, cleaning, and childcare, for example. It could depend on your wealth. So in the case of developing countries, your wealth could if you live in a well-to-do household in a developing country, you could invest in a vacuum. So you spend less time on cleaning, or you could outsource. You could outsource your domestic and care tasks to elsewhere. You could hire a helper, or you could afford to go to restaurants more often, for example. Or so it really depends on a bunch of socioeconomic characteristics. Your age, gender, education attainment also affects how you allocate your time. And it also depends on your household characteristics, household composition, the number of kids you have, the number of elderly individuals living in your household wealth, and the location of the household also affects. And it also depends on your preferences. Your work ethics could affect how you allocate your time, and the degree of altruism towards other family members, or the weather, and your physical and mental well-being also affects how we allocate our time. Government policy, if the government has a policy where they provide free lunch for kids, then maybe the parents would allocate less time toward cooking and cleaning. So when we do econometrics analysis, our goal is to minimize bias and to increase the accuracy, especially the accuracy of our estimates, such as the alpha one over here. So let me invite migration back into the discussion. So even though I am focusing on migration and how that affects time allocation, to minimize biases, I have to include all other relevant factors that affect time allocation in it. So all those factors that I've mentioned, all those age, gender, education, for example, all those factors that are listed in the third bullet point on this slide, they're observed because they're in the labor force survey. So those items would go into the X variable here. We call it the control variable. It's a vector that like your shopping basket contains a bunch of items in it. Okay, so the X would capture the observed relevant characteristics that affects time use. So now the E is the errors term. It captures the unobserved characteristics that affects your time use. As I've mentioned earlier, our time allocation is affected by preferences, work ethics, attitudes towards life, physical and mental well-being. Those type of things is not collected in the labor force survey because it's quantitatively difficult to measure. For example, how can we measure our attitude towards life? Because that is an important aspect affecting how we spend our time. Or how do we measure work ethics? Those type of important factors is hard to quantify. So it would go into the errors term. We call that noises because it still affects time allocation. So that's pretty much the equation, the main equation that we use to estimate time allocation. And the estimation strategy that we're using to estimate this model is called instrumental Tobit model. Instrumental Tobit model. So I don't have time to go over that strategy, but that is the strategy we're using. And because we're paying attention to gender and age, because they would have differential effect on how we allocate our time, we estimate our model separately by age and gender. And so, for example, there would be one equation for boys, another equation for girls, for working age men, working age women, so on and so forth. And so in the next 6 slides, except the next slide, we're gonna be looking at the results that we get for the alpha one here shown on equation 1. Okay, I think I've sufficiently explained this equation, so I'm gonna move on to the next slide. So this graph shows the descriptive statistics. So it basically shows the average work time by household migration status and age cohort. And you can see the no and the yes group. The yes group essentially captures migrant sending household. The no group captures no migrant household. So the overall, this descriptive statistics, it shows that individuals living in migrant sending households, they spend more time on work activities than those living in non-migrant sending households. For example, let's look at the working age subsample. Working age individuals on average spend more time on agricultural activities, domestic and care work, as well as water and firewood collection than those living in non-migrant sending households. So this descriptive statistics alone provide an indication that migration may be positively related to work time of the left behind individuals. So let's take a look at what we get for the alpha one. So this table and the next 5 tables is going to show the our econometrics estimates on the impact of migration on work time of each subsample. We're going to focus only on the numbers with the stars on it, because the number without the stars essentially captures statistical significance. So if the number doesn't have stars, it means that migration has 0 impact or have no impact on the work time. So we're just gonna focus on the one with the stars. Okay, so what is this 17.9 number telling us? So it shows that an increase in the number of migrants in the household increases boys' work time in agriculture by 18 hours per week. It has no effect on girls in terms of agricultural work, and no effects on children's time in domestic and care work. Migration also increases children's, especially girls' work time in water and firewood collection significantly, but it reduces boys' time in non-agricultural work by 29 hours per week. Moving on to working age individuals. Migration has a strong positive effect on working age men's and women's time in agricultural work, especially among working age women. It has no impact on their time in domestic and care tasks. And migration also has a strong impact on working age individuals' time in water and firewood collection. It increases men's time by almost 20 hours per week. And but it has a negative effect on men's time in non-agricultural work. Moving on to the elderly individuals. Migration has a positive effect on elderly women's time in agricultural work, as well as their time in domestic and care tasks. It increases her time in agricultural work by 13 hours per week, and their time in domestic and care tasks by 7 hours per week. It also increases men's time in water and firewood collection by 14 hours per week. No effect on elderly females, and no effect on elderly individuals' time in non-agricultural work. Actually, this 14 hours per week is a shift in the division of labor. It provides an evidence of a shift in the division of labor, because usually water and firewood is performed in the context of Nepal by women and children, especially girls. But because of migration, it's shifting the workload to elderly men. So I think that's interesting. Okay, so before we move on to the conclusion, one question may raise is that how accurate are these estimates that I've just showed you? So in order to answer that question, we did quite a bit of sensitivity analysis to check whether our estates, our key estimates, are robust to different specifications. So we use a different model. We use IV probit model. We also check whether the results are sensitive to the specification of the outcome, the time variable, whether it's sensitive to the specification of the migrant variable, as well as whether it's sensitive to the subsample. And so the results confirm that our sensitivity analysis results, provides support to our main results, that we can be confident that migration indeed increased the work time of the left behind individuals. So, okay. So the empirical finding, what it's really telling us is that migration, it reduces household labor force. It changes the roles and the responsibilities of the left behind individuals. And it also, because of migration, instead of reducing the workload of left behind individuals, it actually prolongs the workload and the responsibilities of the working age men and women in order to compensate for the loss of labor. It also redistributes and shifts the household responsibilities of those who are not typically in the labor force and those who are not typically involved in that particular activity to left behind family members, especially children and elderly individuals. And I think this conclusion in a way is problematic in the sense that it creates another layer of development challenge for Nepal, because for example, Nepal, the issue of child labor is already pretty severe in Nepal, much more severe than in India. So migration, if without any assistance, it could exacerbate this issue, and it could, with the additional workload, it could hinder the well-being and the health of the left-behind individual, especially those living in poor households. And so the policy implication of this is that the results, it shows that migration, the left-behind family members in rural areas, they need greater attention and assistance from policymakers and from the government in order to help reduce their work burden. And one of the strategy to do that is to provide access to basic infrastructure such as water and electricity to rural areas of the household, because this could potentially decrease the amount of time that they spend on household work and as well as water and firewood collection, and also providing access to labor-saving technology and practices in agriculture can really help to not only boost the agricultural productivity, but also reduce the labor intensiveness and work time in agriculture and free up the amount of time that left behind people have for other better paying economic activities. So that is basically it for my presentation. I hope you learned a little bit about migration and the family left behind. So now I'm ready to take on questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Phanwin, for a wonderful presentation. So let's open up the floor for questions. So let me begin in order. So this is a very interesting question. You talked about the push and pull factors about the migration. And we are wondering whether there is any evidence or perception that climate change is also contributing to migration.
Yes, definitely. Even though my paper or the control variables do not have variables capturing environmental changes or climate change, there's a strong evidence that I think because of drought and landslides, as well as I think I saw literature on drought. It forces people to move away from agriculture to elsewhere. And I think that environmental factors is actually one of the major factors pushing people away from agriculture. And it's actually the main force, the main primary reason why the agricultural productivity in Nepal is fairly low. So it's an important driver.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. So farmers are migrating to the Terai because of rich agricultural land. People are migrating out of the Middle Hills and the Himalayas because of poor environment. Did you account for this difference in your analysis?
We have, so in the model, we have location fixed effects. So we do account for locations of the residents of the left behind individuals. But we don't have the specific reasons as to why individuals move away from each location, but we do account for we do have location fixed effects in the model.
Okay, this is more like a comment. I mean, Nepal is like Hawaii. Its major source of income is tourism.
Mm-hmm.
So there are few high-value agricultural products, and the factory development is constrained by India, controlling what can be imported and exported. So it's difficult to find a solution. So this is a comment. Do you have any thought about this, or this is policy implication?
Yeah, I think in terms of Nepal's economy, because it's bordering with India, I think there's a lot of issues associated. Well, one advantage of being next to India is the free flow of migrants across the border. But because India is such a big countries with robust economic growth, there's a lot of issues that Nepal has to deal with across the border as well. So I think in terms of transportation of goods, Nepal is not doing very well in competition to India. So I think there are a few trade-offs about bordering with a large country like India.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, well, actually, this is my question. So, I mean, this is a very interesting topic. And are there any evidences in other Asian countries? I know that you have been working on Cambodia and other countries. So if there is any other evidences in Asia, are they consistent with your results for Nepal? So the remittances and the migration actually has a positive effect on the timing, right? So especially for male. So,
right. So yeah. So there to my knowledge, there's another study focusing on China, and actually I think two studies focusing on China that looks at changes in how it affects the left behind individuals. So the China study, they also find that it increases the time allocation of the left behind individuals, but our study is contributing to that study because that particular study does not capture all the age cohorts. It only includes children and the elderly individuals, which are the vulnerable group and marginalized groups of individuals in developing countries. But our paper is including the working age individuals in it. And we found that the work burden actually falls on the shoulder of working age individuals, especially women. So it is consistent with the literature, although there's a minor difference for the other Chinese, another study focusing on China. They only focus on left behind women, and they found that left behind girls, they take on more workload, but not women. So there's some slight difference between this study and that particular article.
Okay. Someone sent me the question. Okay, this is an interesting question too. So what does migration mean for that staggering statistics of 90% of underemployment of young people that you mentioned in the beginning? So in terms of labor policy or programs? So
right. So a lot of young Nepalese workers, they are migrating to Kathmandu Valley or abroad in order to find better job or find job opportunities and better job opportunities. And so I think migration is not a long-term solution to addressing unemployment in the case of Nepal. And in fact, the COVID-19 has actually exacerbated the issue of unemployment because there is a reverse migration. A lot of people are coming back to Nepal now. A lot of migrants have to return to Nepal because of the COVID-19. So the issue of high unemployment in Nepal has been exacerbated, and I don't think migration can address that, especially in the phenomenon of the COVID pandemic. But I think one way to address that is really to stimulate development, more development in Nepal. But that is a challenge because of the geographical constraints. It's actually very hard for the government to build transportation system to reach the remote villages in Nepal because of the mountain terrains and the natural endowment that Nepal has is very difficult. Yeah, I think there needs to be even more development in the rural areas of Nepal, especially in hard to reach area. And I don't think migration is a sustainable long-term solution to that.
Okay. Let me ask this question. This is directed to me. Did you find that the family uses the remittances to invest in any new sector, like in the rural economy, like livestock and others? You have the micro data, so.
Yeah, that's a good question. And in fact, one of the weaknesses of this paper is that we don't have remittances in the model. And the reason for that is the data on remittances, they have a lot of zeros. So a lot of people are not reporting the non-labor income aspects of migration. And so in the data set, there's actually no variable on how the left behind individuals are using their remittances. So if there's data and on that, it would actually enrich the study, but unfortunately, they didn't collect the data on how remittances are used. Otherwise, we could observe whether remittances are used for conspicuous consumption, or is it used to invest in agriculture or non-agricultural work. Unfortunately, we don't have data on that.
Okay, thank you. This is a little bit difficult political question, actually. Do you know how the Maoist insurgency, like revolts or uprising, affect the rural migration and for those who left behind? So
yeah. So I think political instability and has a significant effect on I did not take into account how it affects people left behind, but it has a considerable effect on migration, because I think during the past 26 years, Nepal has been changing its government coalition almost every single year. I think during the past 26 years, they have had 22 government coalitions. So the frequent change in the government is a major obstacle to development, because policies and development plans cannot be thoroughly implemented with this frequent change in the government and the political instability. So it definitely has an effect on the migrants, as well as the livelihoods and the well-being of individuals in Nepal in general.
Okay. The next question is also very interesting, because I'm also an economist, so we always look at the migration, as from the point of like push or pulling effect of economy. But there are many probably other individual reasons that may drive migrants to migrate, such as wanting to experience a foreign country, tired of farming, without thinking about the householders, right? So can you explain this? Can you find is there any variable or question in your survey, the reasons for migration, individual reasons for migration?
Not related to those factors that you have mentioned. There's no, but this is actually one of my instrumental variable, is the social network. So I think social network has a strong effect on whether or not people want to migrate. So if they have a strong social network in the area of destination, then that's alone a pull factors creating incentives for people to work. And I think based on my model, it shows that if there are a large number of migrants in a community, it actually has a positive effect on migration in other households. Because if household A sees, oh, household B, household C, they all have migrants and they have better livelihoods. Okay, so we should adopt the same livelihood strategy by employing labor migration to diversify our livelihoods. So social network and the migration trend within the village, they do really affect the migration decisions of rural areas.
Okay, thank you. We have probably time for a couple more questions. The next question is, what is the role of technology change on economy or migration? This is a very broad question actually. What's the
role of technology?
Everything, yeah.
I think
information.
Well, so let me address this question in terms of agriculture. I think in Nepal, because the productivity is so low, people are not adopting new technology to farm and to enhance their productivity, and that's a major development challenge for Nepal is the slow growth in agriculture. And I think if they have better and modern technology, they can better. It's an important input in agricultural production. So if they have better technology, they can enhance their agricultural growth. So I think technology is certainly another important essential driver of agricultural productivity.
Okay, so we have actually 2 more minutes, time for one more Q&A. If there is no Q&A, Phanwin, what would be your next research topic in terms of migration?
Yeah, so the next research topic that I'm working on focuses on migration, and this time we're going to include remittances. It focuses on migration, remittances, and rice production in the context of Cambodia. Okay. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes our EWC Insights today. And please contact Dr. Phanwin Yokying at yoking@eastwestcenter.org for more questions. Also, please note that our next EWC Insights will be held on August 18, Wednesday, 4 weeks from today. Dr. Gretchen Donhauer will talk about counting women's work in that presentation. Again, thank you very much for excellent presentation and asking questions.